right. Welcome, everyone, to the Friendly Skies podcast, episode 7. I'm your pilot and host, Matt, and with co-host Glenn. Glenn, we have a new guest today, if you'd like to introduce him.
Yes, this is Boston O'Donoghue. Boston is my oldest friend, I think, or at least the one that I still talk to. I mean, I'm sure when I was an infant, there were like other babies near me, but Bozzy and I go way back. And if you hear me refer to Bozzy, that's synonymous with Boston. Boston, tell us about yourself. What are you up to? What is your current thing?
Well, I'm at Humboldt State University in Humboldt County, Northern California, and I'm focusing on emphasis in archaeology as part of their anthropology program there.
Which is why we wanted Bozzy here more than once, because this being very much a travel game, I knew that Boston would have quite a bit to say with regards to the places that we can go.
Yes, and
where are we going today, though? We're going to Bozzy's stomping grounds, I think.
Well, I was thinking we could take a flight from Calais, France, across the English Channel, over towards London. It's It's only about 20 miles.
Right.
Well, from Calais to Dover, and then another 50 miles into London. But it might be a good intro to talk a little bit about, I don't know, maybe what we can perceive as the brief history of England up until the scientific revolution. But I wanted to talk more about some of the occultic roots of the scientific revolution in the Elizabethan era and a little bit after that.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's two ways we can go about this. So, we can spend some time flying around areas that are significant to history. And if the flight path feels too short, if we feel like we've run out of air by the time you've run out of voice, I think you suggested we could go on to Bath, or do you want to just stick around to London?
You could either try and land in London, or you could keep flying along the southern country to Bristol.
Okay. Well,
I don't know.
You guys are definitely making this flight route a little complicated, but that's okay. I'm definitely excited because, Glenn, you really talked up this last episode, so I definitely want to hear about the occult, and I'm curious to see what Bozzy's going to talk about.
Well,
but
Bozzy's going to talk about all kinds of things, but also I've spent a little bit of time in London and Bath recently.
Okay. All right.
So I'm excited to see that in game 2, because that was like my big work vacation a few years back.
So let me ask Bozzy, we've named a couple locations here: London, Calais, France, which I don't even know if I can spell that correctly right now. If you want to tell me how to spell that.
Calais is right off the coast. It's it's near Dunkirk, actually.
Okay.
Let me look. A little south of Dunkirk.
I'm looking up that airfield in SkyVector here, so I have to go separately here.
CALAIS.
AIS? Oh, AIS. Okay.
CALAIS.
Oh, there we go. Okay. Do we want to fly in real time?
It's even called Dunkirk.
Well, it looks like it's probably about 9:30 at night there.
Yeah, 10 o'clock.
Oh.
So, do you want to do daytime?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, that way we can see, because if we fly past London and just keep flying along the southern part of the country, we might fly over Stonehenge. We might see some of the chalk carvings in the hills down there.
Sure. So let's plan out the flight route here. So if you can direct me on the map here, which direction am I heading towards? Maybe we could plan out a flight route here.
I believe it's northwest, right? Based on the proximity of the United Kingdom.
It's the shortest distance between the Calais and.
But if I fly, I'm just saying, if I to hit some of the locations, what's a good point of reference to head towards?
There's just so many blue circles.
Go straight across to the left.
Okay.
To Gatwick.
A little bit to the right. to the right more. Yeah, around there.
Okay.
A little bit north of there is where Bristol is, but I guess they don't have.
Well, there's
Go
Heathrow.
South here.
You
What's
probably
that
have
one?
never had need to fly directly.
I'd say fly towards that one, the Boscombe Down.
Okay. Cool. All right, this is gonna be interesting. 140 nautical miles. That's not too bad. Okay. Do we want clear skies, or do we want the plane to basically be life endangering conditions for us? We'll put a little clouds here.
Clear skies will be better. That way we can kind of see the planes.
Don't worry, people. If you're watching and you like night flights, we'll go to Las Vegas someday.
Oh yeah, that'll be a good one. Okay, Bozzy, do you know planes? Do you want to pick a plane here? I'm sure most of these will work just fine.
I don't know. Whatever you think's got maybe like the fastest cruise speed, really.
Ooh, fastest cruise speed. Oh, we're not going to get a lot of sightseeing. Well, I could pause it too, but we'll do the Cessna. How about that?
Okay. Yeah, I don't know my planes too well.
Are we going to be in the water at some point? Because we can maybe take a seaplane.
No, there's not really any large bodies of water.
Okay. Okay, we'll go with the trusty old Cessna. We'll load this up. We are in Calais, Dunkirk. And
Now,
we're ready.
Calais isn't Dunkirk, though, right? It's like south of it. I think the airport just references Dunkirk because a lot of people are probably going to Calais to visit Dunkirk.
Probably. Well, Calais is sort of that's where I think the channel that goes from London under the English Channel to France, it comes out at Calais, the one you can drive through.
Mm-hmm.
And with all the refugees coming in the past 8 years coming from North Africa and Syria, there's a lot of camps around Calais, shanty towns of people who've made it as close as they can to England, and people trying to get rides. I think Banksy at one point, I know some friends out in Bristol area that went with the crew funded by Banksy to go help build some of the camps.
Wow.
For the homeless people living there. The Banksy put in like 20 grand, and a whole bunch of people went over there and built some camps for all the refugees that were all just hanging about.
Is Banksy like a massive fan of Massive Attack? What was the connection there? That like people thought they figured out who he was because he goes to a lot of they figured out that his art and its placement tends to correlate with wherever Massive Attack is playing at the time.
Well, I think they're all kind of close in that area. You know, the festival culture all around the southern part of England, between Bath and Bristol, and I mean, it's kind of like how in America on the West Coast, the festival scene goes up and down the coast, and then you got the Burning Man crowd and people going to Hawaii, and they're all kind of like kind of close knit. They all kind of bump into each other, and so I wouldn't be surprised if he's friends with them. You know.
And we're off.
We are off. I'm going to turn down just the, because it gets a little louder on the external, outside the plane, which we usually don't travel outside planes, but we're going to get a little scenic view while Bozzy tells us about, sounds like a lot of stuff
So
to tell us.
to apologize to Bozzy, this game is very much a work in progress, so not all the settings may work the way they're intended to.
No, it's fine. I'm just glad to see how it works.
Yeah, if we crash, it's the game's fault.
I thought that this would be a good way to get over to a bit of the British history that we'll talk about that influences a lot of aspects of the world. Really, kind of like after the scientific revolution and Queen Elizabeth's reign. Really, kind of gave birth to the British Empire. You know, she broke up the Spanish Armada, who were the king of the seas at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But this specific flight from France over to England is just like all through history, it's the closest that people would have gotten from this continent to England.
Do you know anything about the Spanish Armada situation? Because I'm not a historian, but the way I understand it, the power was heavily in their favor. It was like the greatest navy of its time.
I don't know too much about the actual battles, but when was the Spanish Armada? I think that they were defeated in 1588. But when you think about it, 1519 and 1521 was when the Spanish went over to Mexico and landed there and fought with the Aztecs. They first were there in 1519, and the Aztecs were pretty brutal with taxes, and a lot of the people outside of the main city of Teotihuacan, which was at the time an island in the middle of the lake, which is Mexico City. And so they when they were going inland to get to the main city, they gathered up a lot of indigenous tribes that were against the Aztec center. They weren't able to defeat them, but inadvertently they left measles. So when they went back to Spain and came back with more men and arrived, like half the people had died from smallpox or measles.
Matt, you're going to have to turn around. We're going to South America. The topic has changed.
Okay, let's.
But no. The point of saying that was like, 1520 up until 1588. The Spanish really controlled the seas. They were. It started with Christopher Columbus in 1492 down in the Caribbean. And I'm pretty convinced that, well, basically, the Catholic Church, when they found out how brutally the Cortez treated these indigenous people down there, the church was furious because they did it in the name of Christ and God. Yeah. And I think, around 1540 was when Martin Luther came out with his Protestant Reformation, highlighting how corrupt the church was, how they would take money from people to forgive them of their sins was one thing, but then I feel that once word came back to Europe of how savagely they treated the indigenous people there, I think that contributed to the Protestant Reformation of basically the corruptness of the church.
Yeah.
And and that was spilling over to England. King Henry VIII, he was in his own way wanted to split from the Catholic Church because of not being able to divorce his wives and stuff. So he started, his Church of England.
Yeah.
And that was his form of Protestantism.
I was raised Episcopalian, and I didn't know what that meant until I read a novelization of the video game Doom, in which a character said Episcopalian is just the closest thing to the Church of England without being the Church of England.
Right. And there's just so many splits that have occurred. The reason why we have the Roman Catholic Church and then the Orthodox Church in Russia was when the Ottomans came and split. When the Ottomans came up through Turkey and seized Istanbul, and they were spilling into Eastern Europe, half the church split. Basically, half of the Christian church, believing in Christ, became Orthodox, and then Rome was sort of the other half. So there was a West and Eastern version and then they've sort of evolved differently. The Roman popes came corrupt in their own way, and I would say the Orthodox Church is closest to the original teachings than what's happened out of Rome, because they've suppressed so much of it in favor of their own control over the people over time. And I think that's what we'll get into over time with this, is basically during the scientific revolution, especially like the Crusades, was all about, and a little bit of the history of the Knights Templar, it was all about bypassing the church and getting to God. You have a direct connection to God. You don't need the church to get to God. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so the church has always been fighting against that by saying like the Knights Templars were doing evil things and practicing witchcraft, and it was because the church didn't want people to have the power of direct access to divinity.
Now, was there any basis for that, or was it just propaganda?
It's just propaganda. so that so otherwise the church would become obsolete, and then science in a way becomes the new dogmatic paradigm, because it's like, okay, people stop believing in God and having faith in God because of what the church has done. And
So what little I understand of Francis Bacon, it sounds as much a philosophical, like logical point of view as well, of the way that people think about science and God, or the way people thought about science and God, as like the things that the past have learned are how we thrive today, right? So like when we think about people's archaic ideas of how to approach the topic of science, the archaicness of it, there was a reverence for that, right? And I think, what I understand of Francis Bacon is that from a logical point of view, he was able to separate those two things from philosophically, right? I mean, I'm speaking largely from ignorance here. I took a lot of fine art classes and not a lot of history classes when I was in college. So, these topics come up, but for me, they were coming up in the context of, look at this great work of art. What was going on at the time? Who was commissioning it? Was the church commissioning this? Like what was why did the church commission this? Like what kind of statement were they trying to make, and that kind of thing.
yeah, I think a lot of people try to a lot of people think that there should be a separation between religion and science, that you have to believe one or the other, you can't believe in both. And so I spoke to a professor about this, about like Sir Francis Bacon, and because
Just to clarify, I don't think that he was trying to like totally separate it, right?
no, they were actually trying to find the
Yeah.
link between the two.
Yeah, he just found that I mean, almost like what you were talking about with the Templars, he just found that if you approach science as a direct link to God without this middleman of the church
Well,
deciding
the
how the
science,
right way to do that is.
the different sciences that were becoming, a lot of these people really believed in God, but the science that was coming out, it was their way of discovering the language of God.
Yeah.
All the physics and what Nicholas Copernicus and Galileo, to them, they were not trying to like defeat God. They were all actually inspired by God.
Right.
Even Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, all of those paintings, um, had a divine inspiration to them. And so, in a way, it's like they were really trying to find the language of God and how He speaks to them.
But how did Francis deal with the language of God differently than the traditional idea in terms of understanding how the world works?
Um, I don't know
Is it a tough one?
how to answer that one.
You stumped him.
I mean, because what I understand, I'm a few years away from when I've read about this stuff, but what I understood was that the general like pattern of thought that people had was very much that the old philosophers, whether it's the Greeks or whoever, had understood things in a certain way, and that it was dangerous to think of them in any other way.
I think that was more the church speaking.
Yeah, right. So is that the split between Bacon and the church? The idea that both are trying to understand the natural world from the viewpoint of God, but Bacon was dissatisfied with the way that was being approached intellectually. This is getting to be a heavy podcast, isn't it?
Yeah.
Usually we talk about video games like for like half of our shows.
Well, I wanted to get to Francis Bacon a little later because
Oh, I'm sorry.
what it was
You
no,
name
it's good,
dropped
but
him and I ran with it.
it's good. It's good because he is an important figure in all of that, because he was late 1500s into the 1600s, and he was like a Lord Chancellor, and in London, statesman, philosopher, attorney general. Um, he is considered to be one of the grandfathers of the scientific method through the scientific revolution. Um, he's also been considered to be the father of empiricism. Now, what it is was he was close with, after Queen Elizabeth's reign, King James of Scotland, James Tudor or Stuart. I think it was his last. He was from the Stuart family, and I think Henry VIII didn't want the Stuart family to get into the throne for one reason or another. He didn't feel that the bloodline of the King Henry VIII's bloodline was. He didn't feel that the Stuart family was. What's the word? I'm lost for words here. He did so. After Queen Elizabeth's reign, she didn't leave a successor. So I'm not sure how he came into power, but he was a philosopher and into sorcery, and had written a book about demonology, which is all about occultic practices through time, and it was later used as a way to persecute witches and stuff like that. But this same King James was the one who he commissioned the first collection of the Gospels, which became the first Holy Bible written in English. And Sir Francis Bacon was part of that project. So here you have a guy who is the father of the scientific method to undercut what the Bible teaches about what to believe about creationisms, or where we all come from. But on the other hand, he's commissioning a Holy Bible to enforce all of that stuff. So that's why I came up with the question to my professor: is why were they trying to split it? And I think they were really trying to marry the two ideas together. There was not really a separation, whereas today people think that there is a separation.
Okay.
But what's interesting is Francis Bacon. There was another book. I think he died in the 1630s, and it was published after he died, left with one of his butlers or something, and it was called The New Atlantis.
Right.
And it was a novel he had written about a new world in America, and the story kind of talks about how a ship came up from the west coast from like Peru up the west coast of like modern day California, and they visited some people on land, the natives there. And again, this is a fictional story, but it's almost a propaganda piece, because the way that the people talk about the land, they say that the founding fathers of this land, of great abundance, all kinds of resource, endless opportunities, and this is in the 1630s, and they say that the origins came from King Solomon. When King Solomon was sending voyagers around the world to bring back knowledge to King Solomon's temple, some people settled in the Americas. Now, that's not necessarily based on truth. That might be his propaganda piece, but basically, in the 1600s, in order to get people to come from England or Europe across this voyage of the Atlantic to get to the Americas, they would need a reason. So here you have this little propaganda pamphlet saying of this land of endless abundance, and it's basically to get a workforce to get over there.
Yeah.
Right.
And then calling it like the new Atlantis, because I guess back then people also heard about the lost Atlantis or whatever.
And that never changed. You look throughout history, and whatever era you pick, somebody is trying to convince everybody to go to America.
Yeah.
Whether it's the gold rush.
Now they're
or
trying
whatever.
to do the opposite now.
Well, I was in a music and history class, and I learned a lot.
Yeah.
Like, whether it's a music class or an art class, you just learn so much about history around that time, because all of those things influence the art and music. And
which I really dug. I mean, like, I wasn't there to be an artist or an art historian, but I found those to be some of the most enjoyable classes, because I hadn't taken it upon myself to learn these things, and it was just so deep and so wondrous. I mean, there were so many times where I'd be in a lecture or reading a textbook thinking to myself, like, oh man, I wish I took drugs. Like, I wish I was one of those people, because this is so intense. Like, I'd be even more into this if I could, like, connect with it on some kind of deeper level.
Yeah, it was one of my favorite classes. Um, but one of the things that stuck out in the class, because he was talking about how the people were coming over to when the Pilgrims left England to get away from the splitting of the church in England. Um, People who wanted to remain Catholic, those who wanted to be Protestant. I said, well, if everyone was trying to get away from the church, um, why did they bring it with them when they went to America? And he kind of smirked and smiled because he was like, well, basically that did happen. Basically, the split that was going on in England came over to America. So in the North, you had one sect of religion, and then the other sect settled in the South. And he said 200 years later, basically the Civil War was like when that really just came to head. So just to recap, the split of the church that was going on in the 1600s did carry on into America, and it influenced the Civil War of basically the split of opinions of how things should be done.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like the U.S. Civil War actually started in England in a way.
Oh, I thought you were talking about the English Civil War.
Well, that's what I'm saying. The English Civil War carried over into America.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You know, they were fighting over slavery and stuff of the present time, but it kind of was a carryover of what had happened in England.
Wow, they should probably teach more about English Civil War in American history classes then.
Yeah, right.
Well, he wasn't even trying to teach us that. It was only for that one question that I had. I said, well, they were trying to get away from it. Why did they bring it with them? And then that's how we got into it for 15 minutes talking about it. And I was like, well, this is pretty cool.
So were you a talker? Like, because a lot of students, they go to school, they have the particular interest that they want to learn about, and when they're in classes that aren't directly related to that, when it's more like on a grander scale related to that, everyone's really quiet, and there's always like somebody in that class who actually wants to learn. Were you that guy?
Sometimes. I would try not to like deviate from what I think the teacher was teaching, because it does take up time.
Yeah.
And I see it with other students start talking about things and I see it taking away from the class. But I can't lie, I would heckle from here from time to time.
So are you saying that I'm sorry. So you're saying that the South, from the English Civil War or whatever, before the Civil War happened here, that the church from overseas kind of influenced what we see now as North versus, back then North versus South with slavery and all that?
Yeah, I mean that's one of the unanswered questions I have is like, someone was getting funding. Someone had to have been getting some sort of European influence. You know, where was the South getting their money? Where was the North getting their money?
Right.
Ever since America declared its independence from the British, other countries have been continuously trying to influence. You know, it didn't start. As soon as the Declaration of Independence happened, it's not like and after the American Revolution, it's not like everyone laid down their guns. It's like since day one, it's been continuously a battle between
I think
in America as well as outside influence trying to come in.
That's something that doesn't really get covered much in American history as taught in America. I think when teenagers are growing up, they get the sense that like the American Revolution happened, right? And then we were over here and they were over there, and they were probably miffed that we won, right? But in actuality, like every major event since then, like it's not like we didn't have a relationship with Europe. Like
one of the key things,
trade, like it was a very close relationship between Europe and England and France, and all of those major movements of American history were in some way or another tied to how Europe would want to influence the political events of North America.
It's also one of the misconceptions about the American Revolution was that everyone hated the British, and that wasn't the case. All the people that in Boston all the people whose livelihoods depended on British imports, they were like, no, we don't want to screw up relations because we're relying on the British imports. So
well,
there
even
was
the people who fought against the British, many of them were deeply conflicted because
right.
they were British.
Yeah, exactly. They weren't American yet. They were all still British. Even in the Declaration of Independence, they were kind of like, we want to get along with the British king. And and they made a list of all the things that he's violating their rights, so to speak. And then I think they wanted to kind of get along, but he rejected it and send over troops. And then that's when they were like, "Screw it, you want to go to war? We're going to defend our homeland."
Mm.
And from what I was reading when I was in U.S. politics class, part of the college requirements, was that when the British actually first landed, they were trying to cross the river from Boston, from the north end over into Charlestown, and they had their supplies were late, so they waited 4 hours. They had landed and didn't cross the river, which was like less than a mile, for 4 hours. And that 4 hours would have been critical because in those 4 hours, all the people from the suburbs came, and once they got their supplies, it was all wet, and the British soldiers were tired. They didn't want to carry it, so it was as if they shouldn't even have waited for the supplies. But that 4 hour window would have been critical if they had just crossed the Charles River. They were trying to get to I think that's what led to the Battle of Bunker Hill. But it's just something like that. That 4 hour delay was enough for all the suburbs, all the Minutemen or whatever it was, to come in and build their army. Otherwise, they would just been
So that was a crucial turning point.
Yeah. Waiting on those supplies.
We should probably provide context for listeners. Boston also lived in Boston.
Yeah. Well, my mother was from Boston, so she named me Boston, I believe. I never really asked. I just always assumed that.
Kind of have to go with it.
But my dad's English. I was born in England, so my mom had been living in England in the 70s, and I was born in 83, so growing up, I went to school in both England and America, staying with my dad, staying with my mom, and where we're flying over now, I guess we're not too far inland yet.
Where are we at here?
So I can bring up a map here. Let me see. I can also fly a little off route if you want to, or along the coast.
Yeah, some guests don't understand that, actually, especially if they don't play video games. They think that
you're kind of
Matt
stuck.
is on a direct line.
Right.
That it's just like playing itself.
But Bozzy, I don't know if you can, if you need a little more context. I could probably look up. I know how to do actual flight plans, but we kind of wing it when we do these at the beginning right now. You want to know what that is over there? I can tell you what airport that is. EGKK. Let me look that one up. I gotta look up here.
Yeah, which stands for what exactly?
Yeah. Let me just.
How are you doing on fuel? Because it looks like you're.
Well, let's put it this way. I should have probably put a little more fuel in it, but if we're just gonna land, I think we'll barely make it. How about that? So that's Gatwick Airport.
Okay. Gatwick is pretty south. Heathrow is closer to London, which is more to the right, more north. And I was born outside of Heathrow.
Oh.
So that's nice. About 15 miles outside of central London.
So, I'm sorry, do you know, are we flying on a route that you would recognize, or are there some monuments you want me to try to fly by?
I was hoping we would see Stonehenge.
Okay.
It looks like we might be on path to fly over the Salisbury Plains, which is where Stonehenge is.
All right, let me look that up.
It still looks pretty populated where we are now. But also there's Longleat, which is a place where I lived with my mom because she was in a relationship with Lord Bath, who owns Longleat, and his house was built in the mid-1500s. It's an Elizabethan house. He's basically an eccentric aristocrat.
What does it mean to be a lord?
A lord is Well, his family goes back to the 1500s, where I guess some guy was in a heroic battle and was gifted, 20,000 acres of land
Yeah.
and some money. Probably like 50 pounds, which is probably like millions of dollars or whatever back then.
Wow.
Back when 50 pounds was a lot of money. Um, no, but there's a stretch in front of his house which is a mile long. So if we could find the house, we could probably just land on that.
Oh, that'd be awesome. I love doing that stuff.
Was Lord Bath? I mean, was there a zoo there, or was it like an animal conservation as well?
Yeah, well, so the mansion, the manor house is it's 150 rooms. This house, and it has lots of grounds, hedge mazes all around the grounds, designed by Capability Brown, who was a famous designer at the time in the mid 1500s. But so up until the 1960s, the house had taken many forms and had many uses. I think during World War II, it became like a women's college.
Oh.
But in the 1950s and 60s, Lord Bath's father, Henry, Lord Bath is Alexander Finn, is his name. Yeah. But his father, Henry, had invested a lot of money into basically buying a lot of wild animals from Africa. And it's not just a zoo, it's a safari park. I mean, they have acres and acres of land they have lions, tigers, giraffes, elephants, gorillas, rhinos, hippos. And the son now is, each generation has been adding it on to this, the attractions of the land.
Yeah. When I was in Bristol, or no, when I was in Bath, I wanted to travel there, but like I said, I was there for work, so it was kind of hard to get out of my work situation. I was actually working a little bit with the Wallace and Gromit people, yeah, it wasn't like a full visit working with them, but we went there and we learned a bit about stop motion animation and that kind of thing. But I was always like in my mind wanting to get away and go visit Longleat.
It can be hard to get around, if you don't have a car.
Yeah.
Transportation is expensive. Trains are expensive and buses can be expensive.
Well, some people did make it to Stonehenge. I didn't make that trip, but I wish I had.
What time of year were you there again?
This was 2015 in the summer.
During the summer?
Yeah.
I'm trying to look for Stonehenge right now.
I was there for about 7 weeks.
Yeah, when I lived in England, there was a lot. I moved to California 10 years ago, and I was living in England for a solid 7 years. And there's a lot I've never done there. It's only when I go back now and actually haven't been in college and learned about these cool things of history, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna go check this out. That's been here forever that I didn't know existed.
Well, hey, I mean, living in Boston, I don't know where any of the things are, even though I walk by them every day. The great historical. I mean, obviously I know some of the major ones, but when you're living in a place that has a rich historical history and you've been there, pretty much since you were a small child.
Right.
And for me, the Freedom Trail, that's how I got to the Burger King. Like, follow the red line. and there would be field trips to places along that red line, but it's embarrassing how little I understand of my own city from a historical perspective. One time I was just hanging out and I looked across the street at a coffee shop, not a coffee shop, but like print copies, and I noticed a little plaque there, and I realized it was like Benjamin Franklin's house at one point, or like his work study or whatever. Like his study was located there, and now they're just like printing copies for people.
Sarum Airfield. That's where Stonehenge might be near. I'm gonna look that airfield up.
Yeah, in that area of Stonehenge, of the Salisbury Plains, there are some old, like, well, they're probably still in use. There's actually some military training grounds all around.
Yeah, there's
So
a military airport just above it.
Do they have
yeah,
fuel?
because we'd drive down the side road and there'd be tanks all parked along the hill. And one time when I was a kid, because I used to really be into a lot of Army Navy stuff, we stopped and talked to some of the soldiers. And basically, they were living out there for 2 weeks out of their kind of little mini boot camp, living out of their tank.
Oh, nice.
They gave me some of their they gave me a tester of their rations, a little can of steak and kidney pie.
I've seen those videos where they test out all the different eras. I don't know how they open up a 100-year-old ration and eat it, but
Right.
oh, EGLS. Okay, that might be it. Let me just double check. EGLS.
But this whole southern part, this whole part that we're flying over is like called the Southern Country of England. And during the summer, you have Glastonbury Festival and all these other mini festivals around. And it just goes back hundreds of years of in this land of people having the festive culture. And I would have actually gone this summer to England, but pandemic issues kind of threw that off.
Yeah, how's it over there with the pandemic?
I've been speaking to some family there, and actually, I'm due to call them. Actually, it's been over a month. Like, I don't know how things are opening up.
Well, I know one major movie story was that the Batman, the Robert Pattinson Batman movie, they were given permission to start shooting again, with all of the necessary precautions in the summer, like July. But they said they were going to start in early September. September 3rd, the guy playing Batman gets COVID, and now the whole thing's shut off. They were only shooting for 3 days before the whole production had to be stopped again. So, I think America is having it so bad right now that we think of other places as all doing much better than we are. But, the UK's not out of the woods, clearly.
Yeah, well, my brother and sister live in London, and it sounds pretty hard there. Luckily, they're able to work from home. My sister has a job. She's a PA for someone, so checks emails and books appointments for a rich guy that does physical therapy. So they're able to sustain themselves for now. But it sounds like every time they go out, the parks are just full of people because everyone's out trying to get their exercise and stuff.
Yeah. Is it? Do you think it's partly political over there? Because obviously it's very political here. Who wears the masks? Who doesn't wear the masks?
Yeah, I don't know.
Disease is a hoax.
I haven't really gotten into the politics with anyone there.
Probably for the best.
Yeah. I spoke to my dad a little bit. He doesn't live in the city. He's more in the suburbs. And he's just kind of annoyed because he can't work a whole lot. Plus my nan is like in her 90s, but she has dementia, so she doesn't know what's going on.
Yeah. Anyway.
I don't know. Up until because I was there in January, and up until January, before all of this pandemic, Brexit was the huge thing.
Yeah.
And I kind of wanted to go to England to kind of maybe settle back in there and be with my family in case Brexit makes things difficult. I kind of wanted to be close to my family there.
Well, that initial vote, I was in England at that time.
Right.
It took a long time after that for Brexit to be implemented, right? But I remember being in a pub and everybody was glued to the television set.
Right. Well, that was supposed to take effect, I think, February 1st, but I was there, and I think January 22nd, 23rd is when we started really seeing the pandemic on the news, and I was due to fly out from January 29th, I think, So I was getting nervous because I flew to San Fran and everyone's wearing masks and coming home. But it was just funny how you don't hear about Brexit anymore. So I don't know how they're doing with the whole trade and imports and whatnot. So
there's a lot of things you just don't hear about anymore because all of this is happening. I mean, every once in a while, someone will remind us that climate change is serious. It just feels like any other issue other than the pandemic. I mean, other than race relations, clearly, but every other topic that really cannot be put off has now been put off. I mean, who's talking about automation in 2020? Right. Nobody. You know, I mean, basic income kind of gets brought into it a little bit because people are out of work and such, but people aren't talking about automation. People aren't talking about hypersonic missiles being like the space race of the weapons war right now. Like, people aren't talking about anything other than how do we get through like another month of this without some kind of massive bailout of some kind. Anyway,
yeah, I don't like getting too far in my head and pessimistic, but part of me is kind of like, is this it? Is this what's happening? We're stuck on the planet, and they're all going to the moon and Mars for the next 20 years until like the Earth is wiped off. People who, like what the hell's going on?
Well, I mean, the uncertainty of it is the thing. Like, we don't know. All we know is that 2020 is basically just like scrapped as a year.
From a year.
Yeah.
So actually, we're heading to Wait a minute. I'm showing the viewers here my Google Maps.
Yeah,
you guys can't see it.
Rescue us, Matt. We can't get into these topics too much.
Huh? Oh yeah, no, I'll definitely rescue you guys. Sorry, I was in the middle of Google Maps searching here. So we're heading towards Maud Boscombe Down is actually the airport we're heading near, unless I'm totally mistaken. So south of here, Bozzy, should be Salisbury. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so I can speed.
Yeah, maybe we could just fly around and look for it.
Yeah, if we go south, we'll find it.
How's the fuel situation?
Concerning right now.
Still on the green, but
yeah, we might have to refuel somewhere. I can speed up time here.
Where should we do that?
Just any airfield we can refuel. You know.
Okay.
So, sorry, go ahead, Bozzy.
I was just gonna say, in what I've been learning in my archaeology classes.
Yeah.
We learn about the history of different sites and the methods that we used at the time. Some of them were crappy methods. A lot of people had certain biases of narratives that they wanted to fulfill when looking at sites.
Yeah. That's any kind of research, right? I mean, you're commissioned to try to make a point.
But the way Stonehenge is now is actually, it's one of the sites that has been manipulated and tainted the most, because stones have been removed and studied and put back. I'm talking like 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think in the middle of 1900s is when they placed the stones to the way they are now. But it was never originally like that. There's some old pictures to show of how it was. They were all kind of like fallen over. So there was this whole thing to kind of like renovate it, so it looks proper. But they don't really know how exactly it was originally because they moved it around so much.
Yeah.
Not moved it around, but like displacing stones.
So what did they use to, did they just use text, just trying to find somehow to recreate it?
I think so.
I was gonna ask you a question about, because you mentioned the occult before, and the persecutions of, the reasons why they write these books, and I'm sure you could get into all the reasons. Don't you get tired of, as you research further in history and find out why everything happened, that it's all just based on self-interest and bias? Do you just like, oh, this happened really because of this, and it's all...
You see a lot. You see a lot of that. I mean,
Like, what was the reason for the book that you mentioned about the occult? Like, I was going to ask you, why did he write that?
What, the demonology book?
Yeah.
I think his purpose was basically I think, because what I had said, what I mentioned earlier, is that it was used against what his purpose of it was for. His purpose was really to sort of document. It was basically meant to be a resource book for sorcery and methods of witchcraft, which again is interesting. So you have this guy, King James, who's written a book as a resource manual for sorcery, but at the same time he's the guy who commissioned the King James version of the Bible. And
right.
So you would think that those things would conflict against each other.
Yeah,
you know? And again, with Sir Francis Bacon, who's a scientist, but also was part of, commissioning the, collecting, because there was no, before the King James Version of the Bible, it was like the Gospel according to John, the Gospel according to Daniel, all the New Testament, different Gospels according, the story of Christ according to so-and-so, and then there was the Torah, the Old Testament. But the King James Version was first time they sat down and said, okay, let's get every one of the Gospels, put that in the New Testament, get the Old Testament, and we're going to create one big resource manual.
Right. But did he write the book? Did he write the demonology book because he truly believed it, or was it, because you said he wrote it because of source. Oh, he really believed it. Okay.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people did back then. And there were people who were brave enough to actually research it. See, because I have friends that are witches and practice witchcraft here in California. I don't consider myself a practitioner. I consider myself an occult researcher. I don't have an interest in participating in it, but I am interested in knowing about it because I know that it's affected so many parts of society in the past and in the present. And so it just helps me understand people's intentions.
How did that originate, though? How did they just get into I mean, I made that's a loaded question. There's probably a lot behind it in terms of how it built up. Beliefs.
What I was saying is like there were people who were scared of all that sorcery stuff because the church says if you practice it, the devil gets inside of you and you're going to go to hell.
Oh yeah.
So people were like, okay, good, I'm not going to do that. Whereas some people were brave enough, like I guess King James was just like, yeah, well, I don't know if he was a practitioner, but he might have he documented it. So but then it was taken because he was Protestant, and after King Henry VIII had his own version of Protestantism, but Mary Tudor, his daughter, she was trying to return. When did Mary come in? Mary came in, she became queen in the 1550s. I think she was only queen for about 5 years, 1553. And she was trying to reverse the Protestant Reformation. She was trying to bring the Catholic Church back to England. And she killed a lot of people, burned them at the stake, led her to Bloody Mary was her name.
Wow.
Now, is this the Mary that was the daughter of Henry VIII, or?
Yeah, I think maybe an illegitimate daughter, probably, or I think it might have been his first daughter or something like that. But then Elizabeth, her sister Elizabeth, was kept. She was into astrology, and she was a Protestant, and so she didn't want to get rid of her sister because she was blood, but she kept her kind of in house arrest.
Yeah.
And
I remember that from the movie Elizabeth. Sadly, that's my point of reference.
Right. And so, but
Elizabeth was into Mary being in house arrest.
Yeah, Elizabeth was into. She was into astrology and other things that had not had to do with the church. But she had a close friend, John Dee, who was he was an Anglo-Welsh mathematician, astronomer, astrologer. He was an occultist, really into alchemy, really into Hermetic philosophy, which, just going back to like the Gospels, we talk a lot about how there's a lot missing from the Bible, and so the Gospel of St. Thomas is supposed to be what Hermetic philosophy kind of comes from. They say that they found the Gospel of St. Thomas in Egypt.
Can you explain Hermetic
and that
philosophy?
Hermetic philosophy.
In 5 words or less.
Just for the viewers out there.
Hermeticism, it really traces back to Hermes Trismegistus, which is thrice great Hermes.
You're out of words. That's it. That's all you get.
I know. Glenn's afraid we're gonna.
No, I'm just kidding.
I looked it up before, but you're saying so much stuff that I'm trying to remember.
It's basically it's based on like all through time, going back to before Greek and into ancient Egypt, philosophy of Hermes being an ancient source of knowledge, kind of like I wouldn't say a god on earth, but just an old wise man who knew like the secrets of the ancient Egyptian secrets, spirituality, and that was translated through Greek and Roman. Okay. Hermes being god of wisdom, being associated with the planet Mercury, and over the years.
That's interesting. No, I mean you could. I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot to explain the whole trace. It's interesting how trace, it's like a belief system, and it's just traced through, you said, through the text.
I'm glad you asked the question, because the thing that I'm trying to understand, and maybe I'm derailing Boston's train of thought with this, but the thing I understood about the scientific revolution, or you know, the Francis Bacon's theories were to move away from the idea of looking on the great thinkers and philosophers of the past as being infallible, right? So is that where Hermeticism comes into it? Is it that
do you mean infallible? How do you mean infallible?
What I mean is that this is all like 5 years old since I've learned this stuff, but the idea of the way that people approached the relationship between religion and science was that people like Hermes or Pliny the Elder or whoever had figured something out, and that if you went against what had been figured out in the disaster could be the result. There was a real fear of challenging the traditional. Right?
Essentially.
But wouldn't they come up with a way always to, like, if something didn't work out or something, they'd always justify it? I can't remember something I was listening to that.
Well, that's the problem with that kind of logic, right? Because if you take the past as being, relatively infallible, or maybe that's the wrong word. Maybe it's just foundational that I'm searching for. Then everything just gets redirected.
Yeah, you mean like infallible, like true?
I mean foundational, I should say. So like, you don't want to screw with the foundation, or everything falls apart. So all of the logic of how to understand things ends up getting like over justified to pull back to the foundations that have already been set into place. And I think, and Buzzy knows more about this, but I think Bacon was saying that it's more about establishing generalizations.
Generalizations. That's a good point, that once like a foundation of a concept is established, people are kind of scared to kind of even question it. But when you do question it, you end up kind of coming up with your own perspective. And I'm not trying to say that truth is necessary, there's an absolute truth, or that truth is arbitrary. But just the belief systems of the time.
Right.
If people go against the belief system, it can be a scary notion, but you might discover things about yourself and come closer to yourself and away from what society wants you to think.
Especially when disaster can be the result in a very fragile society, constantly embattled in wars. And if somebody comes up with some great idea for agriculture, and it doesn't work, you can't feed your troops.
Right.
Because you experimented.
Right.
Everything was life or death.
So yeah, if you, Bozzy, I don't know where you left off, but I mean that kind of puts a lot of it into context now that I'm listening more and making sure we know where we're going. But are you going to get to? I don't know, Glenn. You mentioned Freemasons and Illuminati. Like, I love that stuff. I don't know if you're gonna get that.
I don't think we're gonna get too much into the Illuminati. That was more of a
or
joke
Freemasonry.
When people talk about this stuff, a lot of people like to talk about the connections of
not Illuminati necessarily, but Boz, you were going to say something. I was just maybe more like Freemasonry.
I think he's working.
I think a lot of the scientific revolution, people like Sir Francis Bacon, it was really opening up. One of the things, I think there's different eras in time of an enlightenment where a spark hits, where people realize, I don't need the church, I have a direct access to divinity. And so the Crusades were about that. They were kind of like, in a sense, Freemasons, and that's what Freemasonry is about. And there's all these conspiracy videos saying that Freemasonries and Illuminati rule the world, and so in a sense they're trying to make it look like an evil program. But if Illuminati is defined as those who seek light, right, seekers of light, isn't that a good thing? So obviously there are a lot of people that are involved in like Freemasonry that are in it for evil intentions. But Freemasonry is really just about being a free thinker, thinking for yourself. I think in order to be inducted as a Freemason in one of the lodges, you basically just have to be of sound mind, and you have to believe in a god, any god, just one god. Not meant multiple gods, but you can't be atheist, but you have to believe in a god. And so that provides a framework of being able to agree on an absolute truth.
You make it sound so rational when you explain it like that now. Took all the
and it makes sense that they would make videos making it sound like the Illuminati is controlling the world and the Freemasonry is trying to control it.
Conspiracy theorists. They do it today with all this QAnon and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But I would say especially today, people are trying to make sense of how, the division of wealth is what it is. So they start to look at like who's pulling the strings of society, and they end up going into history and following that rabbit.
But just like anything noble, any noble cause, eventually, by its very nature of being noble, has a vulnerability of becoming corrupted by an outsider. So the Freemasonry movement of the 1700s is, it's not the same as it was then. It's become corrupt. Yeah. So you have to shift the kingdom of it to within you and be on your own journey. Mm-hmm. Just like the church itself. It started with a noble intention and finally became corrupt, like the streets of San Francisco, the Summer of Love, late 60s, and within a few years it's just rife with crime and drugs, and it was like the city of love in 1967, and then not too long after that, because everyone's just like fluffy bunny love, free love, and within a few years all the vultures came in and contaminated it. And I think that's the same for anything. Any noble movement eventually just becomes corrupt, and you have to be able to disengage and go underground. And I think that's what the true Freemasons, the true noble people of it, have had to go underground in order to avoid
how it started.
Yeah. I got interested in Rosicrucianism because they have a temple down in San Jose. I discovered them because I was looking up Egyptian museums in California, and they have the largest collection of Egyptian artifacts in Western America. So I went down to the Rosicrucian Temple in San Jose, and they got a museum there. They have the largest esoteric library in the world. They're building an alchemy exhibit there, the largest alchemy museum in the world.
I don't think I've ever heard of alchemy in any museum, like any exhibit of alchemy. I don't think I've ever seen it.
The Rosicrucian philosophy is basically all about knowledge of the ancients. And if you sign up with their program, they send you stuff every week or every month that are just different philosophical truths from like way from the Greek era of like Plato and Socrates, ancient Egyptian stuff, all the way up to through the Renaissance up till now. And it's all basically about self betterment, self realization, which Carl Jung is about.
Mm-hmm.
You know, getting to know yourself and your dark nature in order to be able to have control over your darker nature. The unconscious, tapping into the unconscious, because it's not enough to just say like I'm a good person, but if you deny the fact that you have an evil side, then that can be repressed and come out in ugly ways. But if you acknowledge that you have a dark side and you're able to control that, that's like kind of more virtuous than just saying I'm a perfect person, because no one's perfect.
Right.
Well, sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but where are we refueling? You know that for a fact, right? I'm looking at the...
Yeah, I wouldn't worry too much, only because I think we're fairly close. But you know how we do it. We're renegades here. We'll just stop at a gas station.
Okay.
Well, the road, you could probably just land next to Stonehenge, because there might be a road there.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Do you want me to redirect, go south of here, EGDM, and try to find Stonehenge?
Yeah. I'm not... Can't really tell by looking at it.
I know. I think I want to say south if my dumb research had proved me correct, and if not, we're in trouble. But
you can't tell. I've been to that farm.
Let's find out. Let me just slow this down for a sec. Okay. Let's redirect the plane to because that's a good point. You know, we can always land in Stonehenge.
I went to Stonehenge in 2008 and 2009 for the summer solstice. They used to let you into the stones one day a year. They let everyone into the stones the night before sunsets, and the whole middle of the stones becomes a big drum circle. Oh. And you got people like, you got youngsters that are like playing music, drinking beers, and then you have like families with their 10-year-old kids like sitting in sleeping bags waiting for the sun to rise.
Yeah.
I did that too.
There was one year there where like the cleanup operation was so depressing that they started to close things off more.
I did notice that there. I was like, this is a sacred place and people are just like partying and getting drunk and like off their heads on who knows what, convulsing on the ground, like, and yeah, it was a little, there was something off about it, the way that people were trying to experience it.
I wonder if that was the year. It sounds I feel like it was more recent than 2008, that it became like a national story of how people were basically trashing the area during these festivals.
But it was nice to be there, like literally was up against touching the stones. But yeah. Here's the thing is, I have to dig up some pictures on an old hard drive somewhere, but the stones are like, there's something inside the stones. It's almost like iron or something, because the stones are not, how do I say this? It's almost like the stones you look at is cement on top of some other stone, because there's some stones that are cracked away, and underneath there's another layer of something that's underneath, inside the layer of what you see. Oh. Like you see them as gray cement stones, but inside there's like a dark brown stone that's either iron or something.
As a naturally occurring effect?
I don't know. It was really smooth. I don't know if it was. I haven't really done much research on it online or anything, but what I'm getting at is the stones you're seeing is this actually stones inside the stone.
Yeah.
So did you explain? Do you know how they're made, or no one knows how they're made?
Yeah, that's what I would assume naturally. I don't think people were putting stones inside of
Well,
other
the
stones
stones,
that far back.
they say that they've sourced the stones of coming from somewhere, uh, like close to Wales, I think. Um, there's always different theories coming up. Some people say that they were shipped down from Ireland, I think, or um, there's 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 one theory of that it was created during the Ice Age, and that they were able to slide the stones along the ice to where they are now
Yeah.
because it's so darn heavy. But when you look at the landform around it, there's like a little mound, a circle mound that encases it, and then there's some a little narrow kind of canal of two mounds parallel next to each other that go up towards the river. And so it makes you wonder if, when it connected to the river, did they flood that mound area and then float them in? Um, you can kind of see it better on like Google Earth images. You can kind of see some of the. You can't see it from the ground. You have to see it from aerial to see how the mounds look.
Right. All right. I think. Now I forgot where. What did I say? Sorry. I'm now panicking because I'm trying to figure out. I have to just go to Salisbury, right?
Can you zoom out of the map a little bit?
Yeah. Did I say that this was the location actually that we were heading? Oh, and I said then it was south of it. Okay. This is an airport, so it's in between.
You might be going a little too far south.
Yeah. I'm gonna turn back. Let's deactivate autopilot here.
Woo! Here we go.
Yep. Autopilot's off. Well.
What was interesting about Queen Elizabeth coming to power was because her astrologer, John Dee, the guy into alchemy.
Yeah. And so we're back to Mary.
Yeah, Mary was in power. She was trying to bring back the Catholic Church. And then, I'm not sure how she died, but I think she died from influenza. But John Dee, basically, you know how you can give an astrologer your date of birth, the time you were born, and you have like a natal chart to say of like where the planets were in certain alignments when you were born, and then that tells you like what your sun sign is and your rising sign and all these other things, and then based on the characteristics of those planets is basically supposed to like tell you what kind of personality you have, and then kind of predict your future as well. So he drew up some charts and predicted the date that Queen Elizabeth would actually come to power, and she had this golden age of rule. I guess really a lot of great things happened during her era. She defeated the Spanish Armada, but John Dee, this alchemist, he coupled up with Edward Kelly, who was another occultist and self-declared spirit medium, and together they would do rituals to summon angels and spirits, and they were trying to tap into the Enochian language, which I believe the Enochian language is supposed to be the first language that was spoken by Adam and Eve. And they're trying to, every day they would basically do what's called scrying, is they would take, which is really popular in occult and witchcraft, is where you stare into a black mirror and usually polished obsidian rock, and by staring into it, it's like a form of meditation. You start to hallucinate into it and come up with images, and this is a big thing in witchcraft to this day. And when they were doing it, and they were speaking to spirits and angels like Gabriel and Michael and all the fallen angels, and I mean, you can do it to the point of madness in a way, but they were really into it, and that's a lot of like, that's one direction of like occult magic that they were going into. But it's interesting because I was thinking a lot about it because someone said you have to watch this show called Black Mirror.
That's a good
And I
show.
knew what a Black Mirror was in occult practice. And so I watched some of the shows and I was like, wow, this is pretty deep. And I was like, I want to see what Urban Dictionary says about Black Mirror. So I typed in Black Mirror in Urban Dictionary. And the first thing it said was like Black Mirror is when you're sitting in front of a computer and your computer crashes and then you're sat staring at a black screen.
Boring.
And I was like, oh, that makes sense. And then I was like, holy crap. I was like, and then I picked up my smartphone, which is a black mirror.
Yeah.
And I was like, here we are, a society of people. We have black mirrors in front of us. We're scrying by staring into it. We're scrying.
Okay, I'm glad you brought that to someplace interesting, because it was sad to be hearing about all this amazing stuff that you're talking about, and then to find out that it on Urban
we're
Dictionary,
in a modern day.
It boiled down to a computer crash.
Well, but we're like, here we are, a society of hypnotized by our smartphones.
We are.
You know, seeing all this
quite literally
imagery,
hypnotized.
But it's funny because I was thinking about it, and then I watched. I like to look up like talk show interviews, like David Letterman or who's on Jimmy Fallon, and Tom York from Radiohead was on it, and he said the same thing. He was talking about how everyone's hypnotized by their black mirrors in their pockets, and I don't think people watching the show really understood what that meant, and I got it straight away because that's how I felt about smartphones.
For those listening who wonder what Boston O'Donoghue looks like, you can just imagine Tom York, and you'll be all set.
Yeah, I've been told I'm quite a doppelganger for Tom York.
Bozzy, we are, I think, over Salisbury right now.
Okay, and there should be Salisbury Cathedral somewhere.
Okay.
Which has a copy of the Magna Carta.
Ooh, okay.
Did this become a heist episode?
Maybe.
If you guys know what the Magna Carta was.
Yeah, but don't challenge us on history like that.
It was like the first legal document that was supposed to give rights to commoners and to give human rights away from the king. And I think it was in the 1100s to 1200s, or maybe 1066, or was that when the Normans came over?
Is that one of the museums that is not free? Because most of the museums around England are free to go to, like there's a donation box, but unlike museums in America, you can go basically anywhere. But there were certain things I didn't see specifically because I was on a budget, and I don't know if it was the Magna Carta or if it was the Rosetta Stone, but there was one that I was kind of bummed that I had to skip for, travel expense reasons.
Yeah, the Salisbury Cathedral, it's a grand old cathedral. I remember going when I was in school there when I was about 10.
Shit. Sorry, there's a bee in here now. I was worried that was going to happen.
Not in the cockpit.
Well, I mean, me talking in this cockpit while there's a bee in my apartment does kind of feel that way.
Like
it was
the movie
hovering around.
The movie Pure Luck?
Yeah. I don't know how many people are going to understand that reference, but...
There's an original version. The original movie was actually a Spanish film.
Oh, was it?
They made it off. Is that the Will Smith movie?
No, that was Martin Short.
Oh, Martin Short.
He gets
Danny Glover.
He's allergic. Danny Glover. He gets stung by a bee and there's like a prosthetic. Oh shit. Okay. This is unfortunate.
So while Glenn grapples,
do I try to fight it?
Yeah, while Glenn grapples with the bee, Boston, is it south of Salisbury, the Stonehenge? Sorry, I'm really testing you here. And I need better planning next time in my flights. Let me see
Might
here.
be a little bit more west.
Alright. Because Salisbury was behind us, I assume. It was a big town right below Old Sarum there.
My bee situation is solved.
Good. That's good.
That is a first for this podcast. We're in this cockpit, and suddenly...
Oh, is this could this be it? I feel like they tag monuments in this game.
Oh, that would be smart.
That would be nice.
That's not something I've noticed.
Well, Bozzy said west, and I'm going east, so I'm a little...
You know what? It might be north. I'm looking on Google Map. North of Salisbury is Stonehenge. It's along the A303.
Oh, it's north of Salisbury?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
About 20 miles.
Okay, let's turn back.
This is why I was asking about the fuel, because I wondered if
now we're in trouble.
It is
flying around trying to find things when we haven't stopped yet.
It should be about 20 miles north of Salisbury.
Okay.
And there's a highway called the A303.
Okay.
I don't know if you remember a band called Kula Shaker.
I don't.
From the 90s. They got some good albums. See, there's like see that little mound circle there? Did you see that in the field?
Oh, in the field that I'm looking at in front of me?
We just flew over like a little mound circle.
Let me do my little trick here. Glenn and I discussed this. Planned ahead. Yes. This thing?
Yeah, I mean, that might be just an agriculture thing. Yeah, it looks like just...
Agriculture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there
You
are...
were hoping for a UFO landing? What was that?
There's not just Stonehenge. There's another place called Aylesbury, which is another, like, stone circle. It's not as, like, extravagant as Stonehenge.
Right.
But there's a lot of stone circles all around of the southern country. And so whenever they have festivals, is usually like during the solstice. I went with my friend who was like, "Should we go to Aylesbury? It's closer. Or should we go to Stonehenge?" So we went to Stonehenge, but a whole bunch of other people we knew were at Aylesbury, kind of all celebrating at the same time. I think the Alps would be a cool thing if you flew from France over to Italy just to see how difficult it is to bypass the Alps, the Swiss Alps.
Yeah, we gotta talk to you for all these flight ideas because these are great. But I do have good news. I see where the A303 is. It's right there.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's definitely that one.
Yeah, so that band Kula Shaker has this song called the 303, and it's just this song talking about how we're partying on the 303 because when everyone's going to Stonehenge, the 303 just gets rammed with cars to like a traffic stop.
Okay.
The people are just like in the highway, kind of in their cars, smoking and drinking.
Getting out of their cars because nothing's moving.
Yeah. They're all out in the road on the 303. It's just this one long like chain trail tailgating party all the way to Stonehenge.
Yeah, this seems like a very England-specific song. Maybe that's why we don't know it.
But they're a good band, Kula Shaker. He's his father. He's English, but his father was from India, so he would go back to India a lot, and so he's got a lot of like sitar and tablas in there with some rock. Pretty cool stuff.
Does that happen a lot with English bands, like the Beatles, going to India and learning from them? And
yeah,
right.
The sitar.
The sitar, yeah. Yeah, so you took a lot of music courses in school, Bozzy? Like, in terms of history music?
Not a whole lot. Like, my brother and sister were musicians. They're 10 years older than me.
They still are musicians.
Well, yeah, they're still musicians, but when I was growing up, they were always playing music, and so I would get into sound gear, and I play a little bit, but after high school, I took time off before going to college, and I went to school for audio engineering. So I did that for about a year, but I didn't finish. I went over to England, but then I got into doing live sound.
Right.
So I was a live sound engineer in clubs and some theater stuff. So I was more of a techie than a musician. I actually just bought myself a fife for my birthday because when I was about 11, I played fife in the Fife and Drum Corps, the Winter Fife and Drum Corps.
Yeah.
We went to like Civil War reenactments and stuff, and out to George's Island. We went to George's Island.
Yeah, my dad drove us to a lot of those.
Yeah, those are some fun times.
I was trying to see Lane at the Monarch in Camden, but the dates, I think he was playing there like right.
Oh wait, there.
Is that it?
That's it.
That looks like a very pitiful version of Stonehenge. Hold on.
It is. It's like flat.
That's no wonder we couldn't find it. They could.
Yeah.
Glenn, weren't we talking about like them custom making some landmarks for us here?
This is all satellite data imagery from Bing Maps, and so a lot of things do look pretty flat, understandably. But I know they did make some custom assets for places that people would want to visit,
what
and
is that right now?
this is just terrible.
Okay. Wow.
That's Stonehenge in Microsoft Simulator. I'm so glad you all stuck with us for an hour and 20 minutes to see that.
maybe having flown over it, Microsoft will render it better.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Just keep flying over it; it'll get better and better.
All right, so we're gonna do a majestic landing on the A303 in honor of Ozzy here.
Well, there is a assets do generally like load as you get closer to them, but that's not what's happening here.
Yeah, there was nothing loading there. That seemed like the flat assets we've seen on some things.
You would think Stonehenge, one of the wonders of the world, they would take the time to actually build that on the map.
I know. So Statue of Liberty looks great in the game. It looks great. And Glenn, I know you don't probably want to hear the podcast playback with our voices and stuff, but the quality definitely is going to be good. So once you fly past like the Sky, what was it, Sky Needle in Seattle, that looked great too. What was it called?
Maybe I'll just, I don't like freaking myself out by hearing my own voice, but I'll put mute on.
Yeah, just put mute. There you go. That's
and just watch you fly and see how much better it looks.
So where do we find are you uploading these or?
We are actually launching all of them. The first batch of episodes. You're the last one here. Maybe the batch before we launch is on Labor Day, so Monday. And we'll send you the link. Yeah, we have a trailer.
They might have turned this highway into a one-way.
Now you tell me that.
I only recently actually discovered this in England.
It's okay. Cars actually clip, but the trees don't. So we have to just avoid the trees.
Okay, I was wondering about that because there's no bird collision in this game, right? If you fly into a flock of birds, it's not going to mess you up or anything.
No, but
not that I've seen birds in this game yet that I recall.
I did get excited that I think Bozzy, you were saying like we could just drive into some buildings because you could definitely do that.
I was like wondering what those buildings are. See, this is kind of where I don't think those are like living houses. These there's a lot of military training grounds around here.
Right.
It's actually where they shot, or maybe they are houses. But the Beatles Help video.
Yeah.
Help. I think they shot in Salisbury Plains.
Oh. Yeah, we should definitely Stonehenge that's not our fault. I don't feel as bad anymore, Glenn, because that was pathetic. No wonder we couldn't find it. But now we found these better buildings. Go ahead, Bozzy. What are you gonna say?
I was gonna say we could do like if we flew across Mexico from Belize all the way to Mexico City, just to see like what it would have looked like for like Hernan Cortez traveling inland when he took his troops to Mexico.
Okay. Yeah, I'll be honest.
That's one of the things I've been focusing on in my archaeology is Mesoamerican history, and so the history of like the Olmecs up until the, I don't know the dates was like Olmec was up to 150 AD, and then the Maya were up until 850 AD, and then the Toltecs were around, but then the Aztecs came down from Southern California area. And the Aztecs kind of came in and took over. Yeah, so I know a lot of the history of how Mesoamerica has evolved in regards since ancient civilization.
Do you have some? Do you know some feudalism, Middle Ages that you can talk to us about?
Like European stuff?
Yeah, tons of it, right?
Or
maybe not much. I'm asking for reasons, but for me and Glenn, actually. But
Crusader Kings 3.
I wish I was saying, I think I mentioned to Glenn before that, like, up until 10 years ago when I moved to California, I learned more from watching, like, I didn't really watch a lot of Game of Thrones, but there's The Last Kingdom on Netflix. I don't know if you've seen that one.
No, I haven't
Uh,
seen that, but
it
you
was
mentioned it.
about Alfred being the King of England, and then trying to form alliances with other parts of England, but then the Vikings would come and like conquering parts of England, and they were trying to. And there was this one guy who was he was uh, he was a heathen Viking, but he was raised by the British because he was kidnapped, and then he's like the warrior through it. Utrick, son of Utrick, is his name,
Hmm.
and basically it's based on a lot of like real history. You know, it's kind of distorted here and there, but basically what I was getting at is I've learned more the past 10 years from watching these fantasy films about Vikings and English history than I have learned through school.
right,
Yeah,
interesting.
I went to a lot of Shakespeare growing up, so my understanding of royalty is very much derived on Shakespeare's plays.
Yeah, I would have to brush up more on it. I mean,
Yeah,
I know.
the reason he's asking is because, and I mentioned this to you earlier, that there's a new game out that called Crusader Kings 3, and the reviews are absolutely stellar. And I thought it was like a grand strategy game in the sense that like you're in control of a country and you're building up your forces and you're going to war and you're trying to claim land. And these are things that are in the game, but it's actually like a political simulator. It's
And it uses
every
all real
single,
characters. It's all factual.
yeah, it's all factual unless you change things yourself.
Right. You
And
create your own.
the amount of depth in this game is absolutely extraordinary. I have been playing it for 2 nights and I haven't even begun playing yet.
Yeah, you need
What's the name
Wikipedia.
of it?
Crusader Kings 3,
Yeah.
because
Okay.
it has a great tutorial, which I guess was not the case for Crusader Kings 2, but it is like an encyclopedia of everything you could imagine goes into royal society during the Middle Ages. And I am both learning a lot and just mystified by a lot of other things and terminology that I don't
Yeah, the
understand.
terminology is what really kills me too. You just got to look up every single word.
Well,
And,
you know,
uh,
Crusader Kings 3, I think, from what I understand, does a better job
right.
at literally breaking down exactly what all these different things are. But it's like during this tutorial, a pop-up will come up and there'll be something that you can highlight to get more information. But there are 5 things within that new pop-up that you can highlight to get more information. And so you highlight one of those, and now there are 5 more things that you can highlight for more. It's just a rabbit hole of information. I don't know when I'm actually going to play this game, but it would be nice to get people on who, even
It's
if
cool that it preserves a lot of the factual stuff too, that people can actually learn about history.
Well, all the characters that involved and like everything that you do, like the demands and I don't know how to say half the stuff and the vassals and everything. It's all how it worked. You know, it's all based on factual things. And like Glenn says, obviously that the fun is that, oops, oh, okay, is how you can control your own. You can change the course of history, basically. Which I'd be very interested to see on your take on that. But that's I'm not even sure how we would approach all that.
and the company has done that with their World War era game too, right? What is it?
Yeah.
Hearts of Iron 4
Yeah.
is a game where you are basically participating in world wars, and you can play any country, you know,
Yeah.
relatively speaking, in the world. But you can also
Yeah.
go off the tracks and
Well,
play your
yeah.
own scenario.
Yeah, no, but I love history, and Bozzy talked about one piece of history that I definitely do not remember, knew very little about. I love like
American
the-
education at its finest.
yeah, exactly. You know, like Rome, and because I was I'm a music major with a music degree, and I did that whole music history thing from that point of view. But
Yeah.
definitely forgot a lot. Bozzy, it was awesome to have you. Next time we'll drive more through roads because we seem to do that well.
Yeah, the roads help.
just driving through roads, really. Yeah, from my end, thank you very much.
Yeah, this is good.
Can you fly a helicopter in this game?
I don't think you can yet. No.
Could you in previous?
Because that would be fun to just kind of dot around downtown London, and check out sites.
That would be cool. We could fly a Piper Cub, but
the last Microsoft simulator was what, 14 years ago?
Yeah, a long time ago. So
it's hard to even say like, well, helicopters weren't in that one, so they won't be in this one. It's been 14 years. They could do anything, really.
They could do anything. They're working on it, and as you can see, this is very satellite imagery. As you can see, flat cars on the road here, so they're working on it.
Someone from The Verge wrote an article saying the next Grand Theft Auto game should use Microsoft Flight Simulator's satellite imagery.
Oh, to make the whole world. That'd be crazy.
That would be stupid.
Oh, man.
That feels like one of those articles people write because they know people will click on it angrily.
Right. Well, anytime, Bozzy, you feel like you're missing home, we're going to pin... Obviously, clearly, we could either drive through your town or we can just fly a little bit more slowly, and we can take a little tour around there.
Yeah, cool. You're welcome to bring people, too. I mean, if your brother or your sister want to check this out.
Yeah, I know my brother really wanted to get into some podcast stuff.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. We'll have him
on. My brother, I'll have to send you a link, Matt. My brother Lane, he's really into Delta. He's really into playing Delta blues.
Oh, nice.
I mentioned that I wanted to see him when he was playing in Camden, but it was just after the period where I was going to be there.
But he wanted to start a podcast of his own when I saw him over Christmas with another friend of his that they're both involved with a lot of music people there and wanted to talk about music. But he might be good to have on. You probably fly up the Mississippi River or something and talk about some Mississippi River
would be
blues.
Amazing.
That would be
amazing.
He would just tell you stories. He could tell you stories about his family, our family growing. Like when he was growing up at Winthrop High School, he graduated Winthrop High, and he had to write an essay about some heroes that he knows, and he was writing about the guys from Led Zeppelin, Jimmy Page, and the Who hanging out at his house, and they called my mom in and said, "Hey, we have to talk about your son because I think he's imagining these things, And she's like, "No, they're friends of mine."
Yeah.
Because their dad was friends with all of those people. They were musicians all together in the 70s, and so they were all hanging out at my brother and sister's house when they were 6-7 years old.
Right.
Their father is Denny Lane, the drummer for Wings.
The guitarist from Wings. He was in
guitarist. I'm sorry.
Yeah, he was in Moody Blues, and then when the Beatles split up and each did their own band, and Paul McCartney did Linda McCartney and Wings, Denny left Moody Blues to be the guitarist with Paul McCartney all through the 70s.
Now I wonder, Denny Lane is in every single episode of that 70s show, pretty much, right?
Yeah, he's a little picture of him in the back.
Yeah.
When they're sitting around smoking.
Because the camera always pans to the same background when they're smoking, and one of them is a poster of
Denny Lane and Wings. He's a good guitarist.
Yeah.
Well, listen.
You'd have to be.
Let me. We could keep talking after this, but let me stop the podcast here. Glenn, you could do the sign off for us before my hard drive blows up.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And we don't exactly have a next episode planned. We have 3 planned. So
we have a lot of ideas.
Yeah, we have 3 different guests who we're talking to about doing something, but we still have to work out scheduling.
Right.
So I can't necessarily tell you what the next thing will be, but
it'll be soon.
There are a lot of exciting ideas. We're going to be talking about video games again, obviously, because we do that here. Crusader Kings 3 has been a point of fascination. We would love to have Denny Lane on. Lane on to talk about Mississippi Blues. My cousin is also super into Detroit electronic music, so Detroit would be a music topic as well. We are gonna go to Detroit. It's gonna happen. And we're gonna hear about Big Booty Sound. That's what we're gonna hear about how to destroy it.
We may have some boring podcasts too with maybe more corporate, not corporate, maybe some more tech focus. We got like a lot of things planned. Definitely not all video games, but we are big gamers.
You could say it's a little up in the air.
Well, thank you, Bozzy, again.
All right, well, thank you, Friendly Skies.
Thank you.
Love having you, man.
All right.
We'll have you back on soon.